April 1961. Gerda's folk city, Greenwich Village. Joan Baez was already a star. At 20 years old, she'd captivated the 1959 Newport Folk Festival with a voice that seemed to come from somewhere beyond this world. Her first three albums had gone gold. When she walked into a room, conversation stopped. Folk music royalty. That night at Gerd's, she heard about a kid from Minnesota calling himself Bob Dylan. Scruffy, pale, dirty even. Someone said he wrote his own songs, which was unusual for folk singers in 1961. Most just performed traditional ballads. Joan decided to watch him perform. What she saw didn't impress her. A skinny 20-year-old in wrinkled clothes, hair uncombed, looking like he'd slept in an alley. His voice was nasal, rough, nothing like the smooth folk singers people loved. She later described him as a scruffy little pale-faced, dirty human being. But then he started singing his own compositions. Joan felt something crack open inside her chest. The songs were raw in a way traditional folk music never was. Honest, vulnerable. This kid was writing about real things, real feelings, not just repeating songs from the 1800s. After his set, she approached him. Dylan was nervous, stammering. He knew who she was. Everyone knew who Joan Baez was. "You write those yourself?" she asked. "Yeah. They're good. You should keep writing." Dylan nodded, unable to meet her eyes. He was nobody. She was everything. Joan made a decision that night that would change both their lives. She started inviting Bob Dylan to perform during her concerts. When Joan Baez invited you on stage, thousands of people saw you. It was the kind of exposure a young folk singer could spend years trying to get, and Dylan needed it, desperately. Between 1961 and 1963, Joan Baez became Bob Dylan's greatest champion. She brought him on stage at her concerts across the country, introduced him to audiences who'd never heard his name, let him sing his strange, honest songs to crowds who came to see her. At first, audiences didn't know what to make of him. His voice was so different from Joan's angelic soprano. His songs were political, personal, angry in ways folk music wasn't supposed to be. But Joan kept bringing him back, concert after concert, city after city. "This is Bob Dylan," she'd say into the microphone. "Listen to him. Really listen." And slowly people did. By 1963, Bob Dylan was becoming famous. His song "Blowin' in the Wind" was everywhere. Peter, Paul, and Mary's version became a massive hit. Dylan was the new voice of folk music, the prophet, the poet. He owed it to Joan Baez. She'd made him, taken him from nobody to somebody, given him her stages, her audiences, her credibility. Everyone in the folk music world knew it. Joan Baez had created Bob Dylan, but something else was happening between them too. Something neither of them had planned. They were falling in love. The relationship began sometime in 1963. Joan later admitted she couldn't even remember exactly when. "What period of 3 months was it?" she'd joke years later. But those months were intense. Dylan was brilliant, complicated, magnetic in a way Joan had never experienced. He wrote songs that made her cry, looked at the world sideways, finding truth in places she'd never thought to look. And Joan was everything Dylan wasn't. Established, confident, beautiful in a way that intimidated him. A star who'd chosen him when he was nothing. They performed together constantly. Their voices blended in ways that seemed almost supernatural. Joan's pure soprano soaring above Dylan's rough emotional delivery. Two different musical traditions, creating something entirely new. Off stage, they talked about music and poetry and politics. Dylan was obsessed with Joan's activism. She was out there marching, getting arrested for civil rights, using her platform for change. "You could do this too," she'd tell him. "Use your voice for something bigger." Dylan would nod, but never commit. He wanted to write songs, not lead movements. Still, for a while, it worked. Two folk stars, two lovers, two artists creating magic together. But fame was changing Dylan. Fast. By 1964, he wasn't the nervous kid from Gerd's Folk City anymore. He was Bob Dylan, the voice of a generation. Magazines wrote about him. Other famous musicians wanted to meet him. And Joan started to feel it. The shift, the distance. Dylan was becoming someone who didn't need her anymore. By early 1965, Bob Dylan had surpassed Joan Baez. Not in talent, not in voice, but in cultural impact. Dylan was writing songs that became anthems. The times they are a-changin'. Mr. Tambourine Man. He wasn't just a folk singer anymore. He was a phenomenon. Even the Beatles were obsessed with him. Joan felt herself becoming the supporting act in their relationship. People stopped seeing her as the star who discovered Dylan. They started seeing her as Bob Dylan's girlfriend. It stung. She'd been famous first. She'd made him. And now he was bigger than her. Dylan's behavior changed too. He was surrounded by hangers-on now. People who told him he was a genius. People who did drugs and talked about art in ways Joan found pretentious. "You're changing," she told him one night. "Everyone changes," Dylan replied. "Not like this. You're becoming someone I don't recognize. Maybe you never knew me at all." The words hung between them like smoke. Joan loved Bob Dylan, but she was starting to realize he might not love her the same way. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. Then came the invitation that would break her heart completely. Spring 1965. Dylan was planning a tour of England, his first major overseas tour, a huge deal. He called Joan. "Come with me to England," he said. Joan felt her heart lift. This was it. He wanted her there. They'd perform together in England, just like they'd done across America. It would be magical. "Of course I'll come," she said. She imagined it already. The two of them on stage in London, Manchester, Birmingham. Dylan introducing her to British audiences the way she'd introduced him to American ones. A partnership, a collaboration, a relationship. She started planning what she'd wear, what songs they'd sing together. She practiced harmonies alone in her hotel room, imagining Dylan's voice joining hers. The flight to England felt like flying toward their future. She had no idea she was flying toward her worst nightmare. May 1965, the first concert of Dylan's England tour. Joan sat backstage ready. She'd done her hair, warmed up her voice, prepared herself mentally for the performance. Dylan's manager walked past her. "Bob's about to go on," he said casually. "I know. I'm ready." The manager looked confused. "Ready for what?" "To perform. To sing with Bob." A long pause. "Bob didn't mention... there's no plan for you to go on stage tonight." Joan felt the floor tilt beneath her. "What? He's doing a solo set. No guest performers." "But I'm not a guest performer. I'm..." What was she? His girlfriend? His collaborator? The woman who made him famous? None of those titles seemed to matter now. She watched from the wings as Bob Dylan took the stage alone, performed to a screaming British crowd, sang all their songs, the ones they'd performed together dozens of times, without her. After the show, she found him backstage. "Why didn't you bring me on stage?" Dylan looked tired. "It wasn't the right night." "When will it be the right night?" "I don't know, Joni. I'm just trying to get through this tour." She wanted to scream, wanted to demand explanation, but something in his eyes told her the truth. There would be no right night. He'd brought her to England, but he had no intention of sharing his stage. The next concert, Joan waited backstage again, hoping maybe last night had been a misunderstanding. Dylan went on stage alone. The next night, same thing. The night after that, same thing. A pattern emerged that became its own special torture. Joan would follow the tour from city to city, stand backstage or sit in the crowd, watch Bob Dylan perform to thousands of screaming fans, never invited to sing. "Why won't he let me perform?" she asked Dylan's road manager one night. The manager shrugged uncomfortably. "Bob's got his reasons." But there were no reasons. Or rather, the reason was too painful to say out loud. Bob Dylan didn't want her, not on his stage, maybe not in his life. Joan started recognizing the pattern. Dylan would be friendly enough during the day, talk to her, make jokes. But when it came time to perform, she became invisible. She watched from the shadows, night after night, city after city. The woman who'd made Bob Dylan famous was now his audience. Nothing more. And everyone could see it. The crew, the other musicians, the journalists following the tour. Joan Baez was being publicly humiliated. Years later, she'd describe it simply. "I just sort of trotted around, wondering why Bob wouldn't invite me on stage, feeling very sorry for myself, getting very neurotic and not having the brains to leave and go home. But she couldn't leave, because leaving would mean admitting it was over. So she stayed and watched. Every night, a documentary filmmaker named D.A. Pennebaker was filming the tour. The movie would eventually be called Don't Look Back. It captured everything, including Joan's pain. In one scene, Joan sits in a hotel room, looking lost. The camera catches her watching Dylan hold court with journalists and hangers-on. He's charismatic, funny, the center of attention. Joan is in the frame but might as well be invisible. In another scene, she tries to get Dylan's attention. He barely acknowledges her. The camera doesn't look away. The film became a document of their relationship's end. Joan's heartbreak captured on film for eternity. She tried to maintain dignity, tried to act like nothing was wrong. But the camera saw through it. Everyone saw through it. Dylan was done with her. He just didn't have the courage to say it out loud. The tour continued, concert after concert. Joan watching from the shadows, Dylan shining in the spotlight. The woman who'd introduced Bob Dylan to the world was now just another face in his crowd. And the cruelest part? This was exactly what their relationship had become. She'd given him everything. Her stages, her audiences, her credibility, her love, and he'd taken it all, then shut her out. The final concert of the England tour. Joan knew this was her last chance. She approached Dylan before the show. "Let me sing tonight. Just one song, please." Dylan looked at her for a long moment. For a second, she thought she saw something in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or sadness. "I can't, Joni." "Why not?" "Because," he trailed off. Couldn't finish the sentence. Because what? Because he was punishing her? Because he wanted to prove he didn't need her anymore? Because he was a coward who couldn't end their relationship cleanly? Joan would never get an answer. Dylan performed his final English concert alone. Joan watched from the audience. Just another fan. After the show, they flew back to America separately. Their relationship was over. He never officially ended it, just stopped calling, stopped showing up. Joan heard through friends that Dylan had married someone else, Sarah Lowndes, less than 6 months after the England tour. Dylan's tour manager later revealed what Dylan had said about his choice. "Sarah will be home when I want her to be home. She'll be there when I want her to be there. Joan won't be there when I want her. She won't do it when I want to do it." The words cut deeper than any breakup conversation could have. Bob Dylan hadn't just not loved her. He'd resented her strength, her independence, the very things that made Joan Baez who she was. He didn't want a queen. He wanted someone smaller, someone who'd wait. Joan Baez had made Bob Dylan a star, and Bob Dylan had repaid her with public humiliation and abandonment. 10 years passed, 1975. Joan Baez released an album with a song called Diamonds and Rust. The song was about Dylan. Everyone knew it. The lyrics were devastating. She sang about receiving a phone call from him after years of silence, about memories flooding back, about how he'd burst onto the scene already a legend because she'd made him one. "My poetry was lousy, you said," she sang, a line that referenced Dylan's dismissive attitude toward her work. She called him the unwashed phenomenon, a callback to her first impression of him at Gerda's Folk City, the scruffy kid she'd lifted from nothing. The final lines were both sad and defiant. "And if you're offering me diamonds and rust, I've already paid." She'd paid, with her heart, with her dignity, with those nights in England watching from the shadows. The song became one of Joan's biggest hits. It still is. Dylan heard it, admitted publicly that he was impressed she'd written about him. To be included in something that Joan had written. "Ooh, I mean, to this day, it still impresses me," he said years later. But he never apologized, never acknowledged what he'd done to her in England. They saw each other occasionally over the years, performed together a few more times. The last major collaboration was in 1982 at the Rose Bowl in Los Angeles. They sang "Blowin' in the Wind" together. It was bittersweet, beautiful and painful at once. Two legends who'd created something magical together, then destroyed it. 2023. Joan Baez is in her 80s now, retired from touring, living quietly. In an interview, someone asked about Dylan, about their relationship, about whether she still carried resentment. Joan said something surprising. She'd painted Dylan's portrait recently. While painting, she'd put on his music, and she'd cried, really cried, all the old pain coming up. But when she finished the painting, something had changed. When I was through with the painting, I had no animosity left. None. It's remained that way. She'd forgiven him, not because he'd asked, not because he'd apologized, but because carrying that pain for 60 years was too heavy. I'm happy that I was there when I was there, she said. Joan Baez and Bob Dylan never reconnected. They haven't spoken in decades. They live separate lives now. Two legends who briefly intersected and changed music history. But the story of England 1965 remains. The story of a woman who made a star. And the star who made her watch from the shadows. It's a story about power, about betrayal, about what happens when someone you've lifted up looks down and decides they don't need you anymore. Joan Baez made Bob Dylan famous. Bob Dylan never let her forget that he'd surpassed her. And for those who were there, who saw it happen, who watched Joan standing in the wings night after night, they never forgot either. Sometimes the cruelest thing isn't ending a relationship. It's bringing someone along just to show them they're no longer needed. That's what Bob Dylan did to Joan Baez in England, 1965. And music history has never forgotten. If this story of loyalty and betrayal moved you, subscribe to discover more untold moments from music's greatest love affairs and heartbreaks. The stories they never told you, the moments that happened off stage, away from the cameras, when legends were just people making choices they'd regret forever. Joan Baez gave Bob Dylan everything, her stages, her credibility, her love, and he gave her shadows to stand in. Have you ever helped someone succeed only to watch them leave you behind? Ever lifted someone up who forgot to reach back down? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience matters. And if you know someone who's ever felt invisible despite giving everything, share this video with them. Sometimes we need to know we're not alone in the heartbreak of being forgotten. Hit that notification bell, because next week we're telling the story of another music legend who chose fame over the person who made them possible. The pattern repeats, the names change, but the pain stays the same. Thank you for listening to Joan's story. She deserves to be remembered not just as Bob Dylan's ex-girlfriend, but as the woman who had the strength to forgive what she never should have had to endure.